Hello, leaders of the world. Welcome to Spread Love in Organizations, a podcast for purpose driven healthcare leaders striving to make life better around the world by leading their teams with genuine care, servant leadership, and love. I'm Naji, your host for this podcast, joined today by Dave Noesges, a retired pharmaceutical executive with Eli Lilly, where he spent 31 years in sales, marketing, and general management roles in the US and abroad. He spent much of his career leading sales organizations in both the neuroscience and diabetes therapeutic areas. His last role was to lead the Lilly diabetes sales teams of nearly 2,000 people as Lilly reestablished market leadership in diabetes over a 10-year period. And he launched several best-in-class medicines. Dave is 1984 graduate of the United States Military Academy and served 5 years as a combat engineer in the US Army, most of that time in West Germany. After the Army, he attended the Wharton School of Business, where he graduated in 1991, joining Lilly immediately thereafter. Dave has been married for 35 years and has 2 grown children. He devotes his time now to caring for his 90-year-old father, spending as much time as possible with his wife and daughters, and engages in many charitable endeavors through his church. He and his wife also travel extensively, working on a long bucket list of international destinations. Dave, it's such a pleasure to have you with me today.
Thank you, Naji. It's great to be here with you and kind of get reacquainted from our Lilly time together.
I wanted to start first by this. I'm biased here in this discussion as I had the privilege to be in your team, Dave, in the US, and really see the incredible impact you have as a leader and the culture you've built. So before going there and how you've done this culture, I would really love to hear more about your personal story, from serving in the U.S. Army to business school and then pharma. What can you tell us a little bit more about this inspiring journey and how you ended up leading large teams in the pharma organization?
Sure. It's probably like many of us. So much of who I am is a result of my family upbringing and my background, and I think it's both the strengths and the development areas probably are a result of that. But I grew up really in a family of fairly humble means. My dad was the first and only person in his generation to be a college graduate, and so it was a very blue collar environment. Almost everybody I knew was in the family and friends and kind of my parents' social circle were steel workers and working class people. And my dad was a bit of an outlier. Everybody else, the college graduates I knew, were all teachers, as my dad was. And so that was kind of the environment I grew up in. And it was a very family oriented environment. It was kind of small town America in a steel town in Northwest Indiana. And people looked out for one another. It was a very strong community. It was a very Christian-based community, and certainly that's a big part of what motivates me and guides me. My faith is very important to me. It was to my parents, but I think my parents taught me more than perhaps any other attribute the importance of humility, and we can talk some more about that as to how it's influenced me and how I think about leadership. But I like to say, especially my mom was always proud of me but never impressed, because the only things that ever impressed my parents were if I was a good father and a good husband and taking care of the things that were really important. They were intrigued by my ambition and my competitiveness from a career standpoint, but it wasn't who they are and what was most important. And then I think so that's the background. So you say that doesn't sound like somebody who's with that background that's going to be ambitious and want to grow and take on leadership roles. That's where I think West Point really began to shape me. And I saw a big world out there with lots of opportunity and so much that I could do, and to be able to live overseas and to be on the East Coast in college and to be probably the first person in my high school to have gone to West Point. And so all of that kind of opened my eyes to all this opportunity that I wanted to be a part of. It just was exciting to me. And but West Point also was foundational to me in terms of my leadership journey. And I think that, there's probably a lot of baggage, especially in the business world, about what comes with military leadership. It's seen as very structured and top down, and there's some truth to that. And then it goes back almost 40 years when I went to West Point. So it was a different generation, and there was kind of a bit of chauvinistic kind of approach to leadership. But when you really immerse yourself in leadership, and West Point was trying to transition at that time, and what they were teaching, that probably the fundamental principle that I took away was one of leading by example. The best military leaders, in spite of the command and control mindset in that, put their soldiers first. It was kind of drilled into us from our early days that the leaders eat last. And if you're in the field, you're in the most difficult circumstances, you feed everyone, you take care of everyone before you take care of yourself, which is probably not what people think of the military. But, when you're preparing people to lead folks in combat, which I fortunately never had to do, it's, the command and control starts you want the discipline, but people aren't going to follow a leader into dangerous space unless they really trust them. They think that you have their best interest at heart. And so those were the most important things that I took away from my experience at West Point. And I think over time, I came to learn some of the blind spots that military leaders had. You could be very structured. We kind of looked for a leadership model that looked like ourselves. And, I think my time in business school started to open my eyes to very different constructs of leadership that made me kind of rethink, is there, what probably was a kind of single-minded approach to leadership in the military that I needed to open my mind to. And that began to help me evolve. But maybe one of the most important parts of my leadership journey, though, was to meet my now wife of 35 years. We met in West Germany. She was an American expat working in the airline industry for TWA and then Lufthansa, and just a completely different perspective on. She was my mentor in the business world. She's the one that suggested business school to me. She was the one that helped me to figure out how to adapt my military leadership in a business environment and to probably soften the rough edges a little bit. And that was a really important part too. But I think those are probably some of the milestones before I got to Lilly that really shaped who I am and how I think about leadership.
Thank you so much, Dave, for sharing this. And it's already profound things that you shared that we will dig a little bit more into as we discuss. I would love to know why pharma and how you started and you ended up staying for all your career in the pharma world.
Yeah, everybody asks me that because it's not logical at first glance. I mean, I was an engineer by training and a combat engineer. I was a civil engineer, and and a lot of the career advisors when I was getting out of the military were suggesting that sales and marketing was not the right space for you. Do something in operations. And, that's what a lot of my peers and colleagues did. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to, I had learned in my time in the military, I really, leadership opportunities and having a team was really important to what motivated me and inspired me. But how I was going to accomplish that outside of the military. I mean, I knew nothing about the civilian world. I didn't understand how businesses worked. I hadn't had a single business course at West Point. I had lots of other courses, but I didn't understand the profit motive. I just didn't know what the opportunities were, and that's where Mimi, my wife, really guided me toward business school as a good place to where you could explore that, where you could figure out what you wanted to do. And as I got to business school and started to see the opportunities, being at Wharton, which is a finance institution and a lot of ties to Wall Street, and Wall Street has had a strong pull for former military talent. I think they got part of it because it can make you cannon fodder. These are people that are used to sacrifice and hard work and long hours and doing whatever you're told. It appealed to the Wall Street culture, and I was intrigued by Wall Street opportunities, but I realized, though, as I was exploring those opportunities, that I just couldn't get excited about. And as important as Wall Street is, and I'm a capitalist, but I just couldn't get excited about what to me seemed at its essence as buying and selling money. It just wasn't the purpose I wanted. And I realized that what I was going to miss from my time in the military was the purpose-driven culture. We had a clear mission. It was important. We believed in it. We could all rally behind it. And I needed to find that. And it was probably certainly somewhat serendipity that I found the pharmaceutical industry. But I started to explore that because I thought that's something I could get excited about. Breakthroughs that are going to save lives and change lives. And the serendipity was just that there happened to be a recruiter coming on campus for the summer internships at Lilly, who's I learned later her dad was a retired colonel in the Army. And so my resume caught her attention in a way that it probably wouldn't have most others. And she encouraged me to think about Lilly. I didn't, even though I'd grown up in Northwest Indiana, I didn't know much about Lilly. And so I wasn't planning to come back home. My wife's from Philadelphia. We figured our life would be on the East Coast. And but I came for a summer internship, and I knew Lilly was where I wanted to be, because I felt like every person I met believed in the mission. They believed in what we were doing at Lilly. They were good people trying to make a difference in people's lives. And that was really important to me. If I was going to, hopefully someday be a leader, was to have a mission that I could really get behind and believe in.
And this is exactly what we do, right, in the healthcare and biopharma industry. And
Yes.
That's why we wake up every morning. And you've touched so many lives by doing what you do with your teams. So, and you have led team in different geographies, large organizations. As I shared, the latest team was more than 2,000 people across the US. What has been your recipe for leading successfully, and I should say consistently, high-performing teams?
Well, I have reflected a lot on my leadership principles and what I think is really important. And I think that I mentioned this from my West Point background. I think what is foundational to being able to be a successful leader is to have a belief in, but also to walk the talk around leading by example. I think that we spend way too much time as leaders talking about what needs to happen and what our communication is going to be, and not enough time about how are we going to lead from the front? How are we going to show people? How are we going to teach? How are we going to live the standards that we were expressing people to have? So I think it's really important to have a clear vision, clear direction. I believe in clear standards and accountability, but most important in that is that the people who hopefully are going to trust your leadership know that you're not going to ask them to do anything that you don't do first, and you don't step up from the front. And it's probably cliche, but I really believe that leaders need to internalize and take the blame, but give the credit externally, and to mean that when you do it. And that's probably foundational. I think that one of my earliest and lingering leadership learnings was that I needed to be more humble. And I think I'm generally a humble person, but the leadership construct, especially 20 or 25 years ago in the business world, was very much confident leaders, strong. That was the military ethos. And the extreme of that, though, is that you believe you have to have all the answers, and you need to project that. And, I found over time, and it sounds silly in hindsight, but if I thought I had all the answers, I was the only person in the room that I thought I had all the answers, and that can stifle others kind of coming forward and stepping forward. You have to admit mistakes. You have to be willing to admit to the people working for you that I don't have the answer, and sometimes to say that I believe you are more likely to have the answer, to have the innovation than I am, because I know you and I know what you bring out, and to pull that out of people. But you have to be humble to do that. And exude that humility, I think. And if you do, people will rally behind you. And I think that what many of us as leaders are afraid of is if we show humility and we kind of show our weakness and what we're not good at, that people won't trust us as leaders. I don't think that's the case at all. And that has to be coupled with confidence. But I think that's the recipe for success for a leader, is humility and confidence. I think more often than not run together. You show me an arrogant leader, and I'll show you somebody who, if you really get to know them, they have some deep-seated insecurities, and the arrogance is trying to compensate for that. And so I think humility. And then the last thing that I think is really important if you're going to rally people behind you is you have to know them, and you have to be able to help tie their motivations and their beliefs to the broader organizational purpose. And that means you've got to get really close to people. You've got to disclose to them. You've got to open it up. Back again to my early years of leadership, the worst advice I got from a lot of leaders in that generation, where you can't get too close to your people. You need to be able to hold them accountable and fire. And it created a leadership construct of distance between leader and people. And I think that's just exactly wrong. You're too close to your people if you can't make a tough decision and make a tough business decision. You can't, that can include downsizing and hiring and firing and making those decisions. But as long as you can make the tough calls on behalf of the business, I don't think you can ever be too close to your people. They'll draw the line. There's a place where everybody wants to be private and don't want you involved, and I think you have to stop as a leader there and accept that. And but up to that point, we're getting better in the business world and more comfortable with that. And I think it's just so important.
Well, Dave, you really gave 3 key recipes: living the standards that you want your people to have, humility and confidence, and get close to your people. And as you were sharing, I'm intrigued to get more into how did you transform as a leader towards this? Because as you said, military leadership potentially is different. Also, leading was kind of command and control, top down, right? Like, it was not this type of organization we talk about today, like more, more inclusive, more liberated. Mm-hmm. So I'm intrigued as you grew, because there is some leaders still leading in command and control. They believe this, they believe leadership by fear. And you potentially came from this and totally transformed into servant leadership and leading with care and with love for people to deliver on the purpose. So I'm really intrigued. Like, is there a story or an experience behind why you changed? How did this happen?
Yeah, it's I've reflected a lot on this, and I think there were 3 events that and I won't go into too much detail, but I'll briefly describe, that were really foundational and really kind of caused me to reflect more and to think more and to be open to growth in this area. And then a lot of it's just incremental after that. It's experience. But the first one was my first leadership role. I was a first line supervisor with 12 salespeople in an oncology district manager position. And I was going through the annual review process. And I had a young woman who was about as different from me as somebody could possibly be, who was on my team, but she was very confident. She's what people would have described as a punk rocker in terms of her look. And she liked that kind of music from that time. And that was something that I could not relate to at all, but she was a great salesperson, better than I could ever hope to be, I think. But I'd finished her performance review, and she was really a good performer. And at the end of that, I kind of asked what used to be the throwaway question: do you have any feedback for me? And especially in those days at Lilly, people tended to say, "Oh, I'm so lucky to have you as a coach." And it was kind of a formality. And she said to me, "There is one thing that I wanted to share with you." And she said, I know this isn't your intent, but you are more comfortable with the men on the team than the women on the team, and it makes us feel excluded. And it's mostly in a social setting. At dinner, you're comfortable talking to the guys, and that's what your background is. I was devastated by the feedback, because it's not who I wanted to be. And half of my team were women. And I went home and told my wife I got the feedback, and she kind of laughed and said, "Well, yeah, no kidding, duh. You grew up in the military." Yeah, I mean, in the military, it was a combat unit at that time. There were no women, so I had never led women. I hadn't interacted with a lot of women in my professional life, and I had a huge blind spot that, had she not shared with me, I look back on that sometimes and say, where would I be now had I not gotten that feedback? I think that's the single most important feedback anyone has ever given me in my professional life. And it's not who I wanted to be. And it just opened my eyes to a blind spot. And then I started to explore what might my other blind spots be, and how can I grow from there? That was the first thing. The second thing was, it was the early days of Lilly trying to to be serious about diversity and inclusion. And we had started an African American forum for our African American employees. And I was invited by a colleague and peer who was African American to come in. I was one of the first, I think, and I was in middle management at the time, one of the first kind of white leaders to go to the forum, because it started out as kind of a forum of African Americans talking about how do we thrive at Lilly. And it was a very uncomfortable experience because I was immersed for the first time in my life, probably in a culture that was different from mine. And I was the minority, at least for a snapshot in time. And I went every year after that for probably 25 years at Lilly to the African American Forum, and just decided and realized then how much, if you want to be an inclusive leader, you've got to immerse yourself in other people's world as much as you can to understand them, and to be uncomfortable and ask uncomfortable questions that sometimes are inadvertently offensive because you're trying to understand, and they will give you a lot of grace. And it gave me courage to say, I got to try this again, and I've got to get more comfortable and learn, and to realize how much that must be getting in the way of me being able to connect with people and be a leader. But the last thing was, after my first daughter was born, I had Lily was reading this book called 1 Minute Manager, which was I don't know if you've ever read it, Najee, but it was an old throwaway book. But it was a guy who used these simple little anecdotes to talk about what coaching should be and how we're getting it wrong in corporate America. But the one that got my attention, because I had a young daughter, was he had this analogy that he shared about his assertion was that we are all at our very best generally as coaches in how we raise our children. And the best example of that, he said, of what we should do, whether you're a parent or not, you think you can relate to this, is the experience of a child learning to take their first steps. And it just had a profound impact on me. And every instinct of almost every parent, unless you're just an awful parent or a cousin or an aunt or an uncle or anyone else, when you see a kid take that first step, is to celebrate the victory, to be wildly enthusiastic. And if you think about it in the context of coaching in a corporate environment, those first steps are clumsy. They usually end up in failure. They fall over and they land on their face and they want to cry and they look up to see how mom and dad are reacting. And almost in every case, a young child like that gets positive reinforcement that says, oh, you're the most special person in the world because you're learning to walk. And it has a profoundly positive impact on a child's confidence, their well-being, their self-confidence. And, most kids who don't have that environment, they're going to learn to walk anyway, because we're pretty resilient as human beings. But it caused me to pause and think about a leadership construct that was pretty prevalent at that time and still lingers, I think. And we spend an awful lot of time as leaders in corporate America criticizing people for their mistakes, fixing what's broken, making sure they know that they got this wrong and they need to get better and they need to raise their standards. It's raising children. I mean, this, Najee, you've got young children as well. You have very high expectations for your kids, probably higher than you have for just about anyone else, because you love them. But it comes with positive reinforcement and care and compassion and wanting them to do better. And it really caused me to realize how much that wasn't what I was doing, and I needed to do more of that. And I think I've gotten better and better at that, at realizing that this isn't a Pollyannish, you need to be a cheerleader. You still hold people to a high standard, but the vast majority of people who work with us are trying to be successful. They're trying to deliver on the mission. They care a lot. And it makes no sense at all to spend so much time trying to fix what's broken in them, but rather to take what they're doing well and encourage them and help them believe that they can do more. And so I think that was really an important insight for me that's guided me for the rest of my leadership journey.
Those are incredible stories, Dave. Thanks for sharing them. It's powerful, and I can attest because I lived this leadership when I was in your team. And again, I think it shows really, those stories shows your humility and also your vulnerability, accepting them, living them, and transforming. So thank you. My other questions was on something you really touched heavily on in those examples, which is diversity, equity, inclusion. Mm-hmm. I know you're passionate about this. You've done huge strides to make changes that matter, not only leading by example, you led by example, and you made sure that each of us is making those moves for a more equitable teams internally and externally. And you've done it obviously across talent management, across a very large organization. So I'm interested to know, how did you make sure you create this caring culture throughout your leadership team and also across the whole organization that I can say at some point became a community, really a community where we cared for one another and we had the sense of belonging? How did you do this, and how did you make sure that it's lived throughout the years you were there?
Yeah, it's a good question, Naji, and I think that it starts with real accountability. I think when I really got serious about having a more diverse and more equitable and inclusive organization, I think that the foundational step is to be very clear that you're going to build a diverse organization, that we're going to break down barriers to that. If somebody claims they don't have a blind spot, or that we don't have an unlevel playing field, that I'm going to show them the statistics that suggests otherwise, and we're not going to accept that. And it just there was a pretty kind of tough, clear accountability. And when I really started with my team, especially in the diabetes organization on this journey, it started with data that showed that we were falling short, that showed that minorities and others were falling behind and weren't having the same level of success. And even going back to look at resumes and say they had the same credentials, the same they should be doing as well. And we've got to look in the mirror and say we're not doing well enough. But then to establish very clear milestones and accountability, and to treat it not like a kind of soft and squishy people issue, which is what we sometimes do in a corporation, but this is a business accountability. And so that was the most important first step, I think. But I think you can only get to an equitable and inclusive organization if you improve your representation, and it gets to the point where the leadership team looks like the population of people who are reporting to us, and looks like the communities that, in our case, in sales, that we're interacting with. And so you've got to get the representation right first, but then you have to explicitly hold leaders accountable to and to measure it. And I think we've had some good systems at Lilly that weren't mine that I applied, though, that 360 feedback and concepts that are everybody tries to use, but you have to make it real. And you have to avoid the temptation is very strong to forgive a leader who's not very inclusive, who delivers a couple of years of over performance and kind of squeezes the results out of people. They're not going to sustain that, but it's very easy for a company to reward that, and then you lose credibility. And so you have to not accept that, and it means that you're going to, in some cases, not promote someone who's delivered great business results, because they're not developing people and they don't have a track record of talent development. You've got to couple it with that. And so I think it, and one of the things that I think is really important that, for you and others who are in senior leadership positions now have to realize, though, is that you need some longevity in a role to really change a culture. And in our construct, at least at Lilly, and I think in many companies, there's a lot of rotations. And I spent the last 13 or 14 years of my career in one role, which really allowed me to kind of shape a culture and build an organization. And I realized the degree to which, for many years as a top talent, by Lilly standard, I was 2 or 3 years in one place and you go to the next place. That can create a temptation to take shortcuts and have the overwhelming pressure to deliver a short-term result and not be paying attention to the longer term of people development. I think it's a challenge that companies in healthcare and everywhere else have, is how do you find that balance? Because I think it takes a sustained effort if you're really going to build a culture.
Thanks, Dave, for that. And I love this concept that you brought, and always focusing on it, behaviors, right? And recognizing behaviors even above results at some point. So if it's good results, bad behaviors, you've always, and one of the behaviors and culture is obviously inclusion that you were focused on. I would give you now one word, and I would love to get your first reaction to it? What comes to mind?
Okay.
So the first one is leadership.
I'd start with humility. I think that's foundational to everything. Humility allows you to be a coach that people want to follow. It allows you to make connections so people will trust you. It allows you to recognize mistakes so you can change course when you need to. I think humility is the most important and probably underappreciated attribute of leadership.
What about success?
Success, that's an interesting one. It's in the business world, it tends to be so simple. We tend to bring it down to the essence of earnings and sales growth and quota achievement and those things. Those are really important. I think you've got to have and care about and have a central focus around the specific business objective. I mean, that's what we're about. But if that's the only definition, I think you're going to fall way short. And nobody's going to want to be a part of that team, because you can deliver business results year in and year out and have a group of people who are dissatisfied and not rewarded in their careers. And so that's why I think that success has got to include helping people understand what really matters to them and what really motivates them, and being able to tie the business objectives and the success of the organization to what motivates individuals and motivates teams. And, when I learned that about myself, that the most important thing, what energizes me, what gets me up in the morning, what makes me feel successful, is to be a part of a successful team who have a shared purpose, who are attacking that purpose, who are working together, who have each other's back. And that feeling a team and being a part of that and wanting to accomplish the goals, that journey was way more important to me than actually the business result, but it was a means to an end, and it got to the business result. And when I realized that, I knew that's what was going to drive me. And I think it's going to be a little different for other people, but I think most people want to be a part, especially if you're choosing a business career. You want to be a part of a team that's doing something that matters to you. And if you can rally that together and define success that way, I think the business results will come.
What about leaders eat last?
Yeah, it's the military's way of describing servant leadership, and I think it's so fundamental and so foundational. If you want to be a leader who people want to follow, you have to eat last, and it comes in every respect. They need to know that you're willing to make a sacrifice on their behalf, that you're willing to go to bat for them if they feel like they've been mistreated, that you're going to be an advocate for their career if they've delivered, that you're going to forgive them and help them overcome it if they've made a mistake, even if it's a pretty significant mistake. And that if you're giving someone really tough feedback, it's not because you've got a big ego and you want to just be, and prove who's the boss, but it's because you just want to make them better, and they've got to believe that. So I think that, it's servant leadership means everything to people. I mean, I've often, as I talk to young leaders at Lilly and in other organizations now, I always ask them, what do they want in a coach, and think about the best coach, the best leader, the best mentor you ever had. What were the attributes that they brought to the table? And they may not say that leader ate last, but they're going to describe all of those attributes that come from putting others first and being a servant leader and caring about them and making them better. And often it'll include some really tough feedback and real challenge. And they stretched me, and sometimes I couldn't stand them because they just kept pushing me. But I always knew they were doing it because they wanted me to be better, not because they were trying to be better.
The last one is spread love in organizations.
Yeah, it's interesting. The idea of spreading love in an organization was uncomfortable for me, and probably till very late in my career, if you'd said, how do you spread love? I would have been like, well, that's not what we do here, Najee. This is work, and it's, supposed to be tough. And it's, but so much of what we've been talking about is about caring deeply for other people and people who are different from you, and trying to help them be better, and some self-sacrifice. And I think spread love in an organization is not about the intimacy and the feelings that you have for a spouse or a family member, but it is about deep caring for other people and wanting to see them succeed and rallying behind them when they have a difficult circumstance, whether it's in their business life or in their personal life, and caring enough about them to be there for them. And people will run toward a leader that is there for them when they need them the most, and when they didn't expect it, and run from a leader who's not there for them under difficult circumstances. The challenge for organizations and a healthcare company is, how do you as an organization demonstrate to people that you care for them and you love them in that sense. And organizations don't love people, but I think the recipe there is, you've got to hire leaders at every level, and especially at the most senior level, who lead by example in that way, and really put their people first, and are willing to exemplify that in the most difficult circumstances. And there's probably precious few companies that most of their people feel like that's what their leaders look like and how they operate.
Well, thanks for that, Dave. What a great way to sum up and really kind of define what we mean by love also on this podcast. It's really what you've shared throughout. So you're definitely spreading love in the organization as you've built those teams. Any final word of wisdom for healthcare leaders around the world?
One is, as I see the political world now, an increasing challenge, and there's a lot of suspicion of healthcare, and a lot of I think public policy challenges that are that have the potential to undermine innovation. It's going to take a lot of courage and a lot of just stay with it, and tenacity to believe in the mission, to continue to innovate in what may not be the most innovation-friendly environment from a kind of geopolitical standpoint. And that just takes a lot of grit and a lot of tenacity, and a lot of belief that we're making a difference. When you may have a lot of people telling you, and a lot of people telling your young people who have this is a greedy or kind of institution, and you can't be trusted. But there's so much good that's coming out of biotech and healthcare. We've got to believe in what we're doing. We've got to be humble about how we share that. We've got to challenge ourselves and realize when our medicines truly are unaffordable, and what we're going to do about that. But if we're going to continue to have future generations that have longer life expectancies than we have, we've got to live our mission and in healthcare. The other thing, on a more personal note, that as I'm retired now and in a different phase of my life, that I've wish I had been more thoughtful about when I was going through my career journey, is to enjoy the journey. The journey's way more rewarding than the destination. I think so much of career steps were, when's the next promotion, when's the next success, are we going to make plan or not? And I probably didn't stop along the way and enjoy the moment enough, and enjoy that to what I knew was my why, which is with a great group of people pursuing a goal. And the pursuit of the goal is much more exciting than achieving the goal, and for me at least. And then the last thing is, when you reach that retirement date and you look back on it, at least for me, I realized that people to me weren't the most important thing. They were the only thing that matters when I look back at my late career. The people that impacted me, the people that mentored me, people who I was able to mentor and grow and develop, and who I know appreciated that. It's all of my fond memories of 31 years at Lilly are about people, and not about the business. And I think there's probably a lesson in that for all of us.
Wow, Dave, thank you so much again for those precious words of wisdom and incredible advices. Again, it was an honor to be in your team and truly an honor to have you with me today. Thanks for joining me.
It's been my pleasure, Naji. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening to Spread Love in Organizations podcast. Subscribe and connect with us on SpreadLoveIO.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. Most importantly, spread love in your organizations and spread the word around you to inspire others and amplify this movement our world so desperately needs.